In March of 1902, at the Riverside Women's Correctional Facility in upstate New York, institutional photographer William Hayes captured a controversial disciplinary ceremony. The image depicts 5 male administrators observing a moral correction ritual, where female inmates are kneeling in submission, part of the institution's experimental rehabilitation program. The facility was run by Dr. Cornelius Whitmore, who practiced radical psychological conditioning methods considered progressive for the era but later deemed cruel. The photograph remained hidden in the Institute's private archives for over a century until it was discovered in 2024 during the demolition of an abandoned building. When modern researchers enhanced the image using digital technology, they identified the central figure as Dr. Whitmore himself. However, facial recognition software revealed a shocking truth about his true identity. The man overseeing these brutal correction ceremonies was, in fact, Dr. Heinrich Brenner, a German psychiatrist who fled Europe after conducting illegal medical experiments on women in Munich asylums. Brenner assumed Whitmore's identity after the real doctor died in a train accident, allowing him to continue his twisted research on American soil. The discovery revealed that dozens of women had been subjected to psychological torture disguised as moral rehabilitation, and that the United States government, unknowingly, was funding the continuation of European medical atrocities through its prison reform initiatives. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos. On a cold October day in 2024, Dr. Elena Sokolova, a world-renowned historian and specialist in 19th-century criminal psychology, received an unusual package. A former colleague from Columbia University sent her a digital copy of a photograph discovered during the demolition of an old building at the Riverside Women's Correctional Facility in upstate New York. The image, yellowed with age, captured an unusual moment. 5 men in austere early 20th century suits observing a group of kneeling women in prison garb. The caption on the back of the photograph read, "Moral Correction Ritual, March, 1902, Riverside." Sokolova was immediately intrigued by this historical artifact, as her entire academic career had been dedicated to studying controversial rehabilitation methods in American correctional facilities of that period. Her initial impression of the photograph was disturbing, but not particularly unusual for the era. Sokolova was well aware that the turn of the 20th century was marked by experimental approaches to correcting criminals, especially women, which often included religious rituals and public displays of submission. However, something about this particular photograph caught her professional attention. The faces of the administrators, especially the central figure, expressed not pious concern for moral correction, but rather a clinical curiosity bordering on satisfaction. The women in the photograph, despite their submissive poses, showed signs of clear physical and emotional exhaustion. Sokolova decided to examine the photograph more closely. She contacted her colleague, Professor Mikhail Orlov, a specialist in the digital restoration of historical images. Orlov agreed to apply the latest image enhancement technologies to reveal details that might be invisible to the naked eye. While awaiting the results of the digital analysis, Sokolova immersed herself in researching the history of the Riverside Women's Correctional Facility, an institution about which she knew surprisingly little, despite her expertise in the field. The Riverside Correctional Facility was founded in 1895 as an experimental institution designed to rehabilitate women who had committed crimes that were considered the result of moral decay at the time. It was a time when the American penitentiary system was undergoing significant changes, shifting from purely punitive measures to more scientific approaches, inspired by European theories of criminology and psychiatry. According to official reports of the time, Riverside was renowned for its progressive methods, developed by the institution's director, Dr. Cornelius Whitmore, a respected psychiatrist and correctional system reformer. Sokolova discovered that Whitmore had been educated in Germany and Austria, where he studied the latest European theories of psychology and criminology. Upon returning to the United States in the late 1880s, he quickly gained a reputation as a forward-thinking figure in the field of correctional reform. His publications on psychological methods for correcting criminal behavior received recognition in academic circles and attracted the attention of New York State authorities, who were seeking new approaches to the growing problem of female criminality. The more Sokolova learned about the official history of Riverside, the more questions she had. Despite Whitmore's public reputation as a reformer, she found several little-known articles in medical journals of the time, in which some of his colleagues expressed concern about the overly radical nature of his methods. One reviewer even hinted that Whitmore's approaches were more reminiscent of his European teacher's methods than what was considered acceptable in the American context. However, these criticisms were buried beneath an avalanche of positive reviews of the allegedly revolutionary results achieved at Riverside. But what they would soon discover would change all perceptions of the history of the American penitentiary system. A week after beginning her research, Sokolova received the results of the digital analysis of the photographs from Professor Orloff. Modern technology had significantly improved the image quality, revealing details that were virtually invisible in the original. The most striking discovery was the clear image of the face of the central figure, presumably Dr. Whitmore. Orloff also noticed a strange detail. On the inside of the cuff of one of the administrators, a symbol resembling a medical emblem used in German psychiatric institutions of that time was visible. Intrigued by this discovery, Sokolova decided to conduct a comparative analysis of the image of Whitmore with other known photographs of the Riverside director. In the archives of Columbia University, she found a group portrait of leading American psychiatrists taken in 1893, where Whitmore was identified as the second from the left. To her surprise, when comparing the two images, it became obvious that the person in the Riverside photograph and the person identified as Whitmore in the group portrait were different people, despite a certain superficial resemblance. Modern technology was about to reveal a shocking truth. Sokolova decided to apply facial recognition software used in forensics to compare Whitmore's face from the Riverside photograph with a database of known European psychiatrists of that period. The results were staggering. The program revealed a high degree of correspondence with Dr. Heinrich Brenner, a German psychiatrist known for his radical theories on female criminality and moral decay. Further research revealed that Brenner had disappeared from Munich in 1898, after questions arose about his experimental treatment methods for female patients at a local psychiatric hospital. Sokolova began gathering information about Brenner by turning to German archives and historical documents. It turned out that he was a controversial figure in European medical circles, known for his radical views on female psychology and criminality. Brenner adhered to the theory that female criminality has biological and psychological roots that can be corrected through specific conditioning and discipline methods. His approaches included experimental procedures that many of his contemporaries considered unethical, including prolonged isolation, psychological manipulation, and what he called rituals of submission. In the archives of the Munich Psychiatric Hospital, where Brenner worked, Sokolova discovered a disturbing report on an investigation conducted by local authorities in 1898. The report mentioned complaints of abuse and unacceptable experiments on female patients in the women's ward. However, the investigation was abruptly terminated when Brenner disappeared from Munich, allegedly leaving for Vienna to continue his research. No further records of his whereabouts or activities in European archives were found. Now Sokolova faced a fascinating historical mystery. If the person in the Riverside photograph was indeed Brenner and not Whitmore, how was he able to take the place of the director of an American correctional facility? And what happened to the real Dr. Whitmore? A secret kept for over a century was about to be revealed. Sokolova decided to focus her investigation on the life of the real Cornelius Whitmore after his return from Europe in the late 1880s. In the archives of the New York Academy of Medicine, she discovered that Whitmore was indeed a respected psychiatrist who had published several works on correctional reform. However, records of his activities suddenly ceased in February of 1898, around the same time Brenner disappeared from Munich. Browsing newspapers of that period, Sokolova made a crucial discovery. A small notice in the New York Times from February 23, 1898, reported a tragic train accident near Albany in which several passengers were killed. Among the victims was listed Dr. C. Whitmore, returning from Boston. However, what was strange was that just a month after this incident, new articles under the name Whitmore began to appear in professional medical journals, and in May of that year, he was officially appointed director of the newly opened Riverside Correctional Facility. Sokolova hypothesized that, while it seemed incredible, it fit the available facts. Heinrich Brenner, fleeing the scandal in Munich, arrived in the United States in early 1898. Learning of the death of Whitmore, a man with similar professional interests and reputation, but without an established circle of close colleagues in New York. Brenner decided to seize the opportunity. He assumed Whitmore's identity, drawing on his extensive knowledge of psychiatry and correctional reform to convincingly play the role. However, there was something even more disturbing about this story. Sokolova returned to studying the Riverside ritual photograph, now knowing that the central figure was not the American reformer Whitmore, but the German psychiatrist Brenner with a questionable reputation. With this new understanding, she began searching the archives for information about the moral correction methods used at Riverside. Official reports from the institution submitted to state authorities described these methods as a progressive combination of labor therapy, religious instruction, and psychological counseling. However, Sokolova discovered several letters from former Riverside employees expressing concern about what they called overly harsh and unusual methods used by the director. Particularly disturbing was a letter from nurse Margaret Thompson, written in 1901, in which she expressed concern about the weekly submission rituals that were conducted and had a deeply troubling effect on the patients. The contradiction in the documents haunted Sokolova. To better understand Brenner Whitmore's methods, Sokolova turned to the Riverside Medical Archives, which were stored in the New York State Archives. Access to these documents required special permission, as they contained confidential medical information, but Sokolova's academic reputation helped her gain the necessary access. What she discovered was far more disturbing than she could have imagined. Official medical records described treatments that only superficially resembled standard psychiatric practices of the time. Detailed records, written in Whitmore's own hand, revealed a systematic approach to what he called the reprogramming of female moral nature. These methods included prolonged isolation, sleep deprivation, psychological manipulation, and public humiliation rituals similar to those captured in the photograph. Even more disturbingly, Sokolova discovered a series of records of special cases of inmates who were selected for intensive therapy due to their particularly stubborn moral degradation. These women were subjected to even more extreme forms of treatment, including experimental medical procedures that were suspiciously similar to those described in the investigation of Brenner's activities in Munich. However, not all documents were available. Sokolova noticed that many records from the period between 1903 and 1905 were missing, and there was a note in the catalog indicating, "Removed by order of the State Department of Health." This gap in the documentation only strengthened her determination to uncover the full truth about what happened at Riverside under Brenner's direction. But what they discovered next shocked even a seasoned researcher. Sokolova decided to expand her investigation by reaching out to descendants of women held at Riverside between 1898 and 1905. Through genealogical databases and social networks, she was able to find several families whose great-grandmothers and great-great-grandmothers had been inmates at the facility. Many of these families had kept letters, diaries, and oral histories about their ancestors held at Riverside. These personal accounts painted a much darker picture than the official reports. Former inmates described an atmosphere of fear and psychological terror, where the slightest violations of the rules led to severe punishments, and the moral correction rituals were instruments not of rehabilitation, but of suppression and control. Particularly valuable was the diary of Elizabeth Connor, held at Riverside from 1901 to 1904 for petty theft. Connor secretly kept records of her time at the colony, which she hid in the lining of her clothing and was able to take out upon her release. In the diary, she described in detail the weekly rituals during which inmates had to kneel before the director and other administrators, acknowledging their moral inferiority and natural inclination to depravity. Connor also described more disturbing aspects of these ceremonies, how some women were selected for special therapy after the rituals and how these women returned, changed, often with a vacant look and unexplained fear of the director. In one particularly disturbing entry, she mentioned overhearing a conversation between two guards about the doctor's Germanic methods, which were too radical even for Riverside. The truth was even more horrific than initial findings suggested. With the help of Professor Orloff, Sokolova decided to apply the most modern digital analysis technology to the ritual photograph to reveal any additional details that could help with the investigation. Using advanced image enhancement software, they were able to significantly improve the clarity of the photograph, allowing them to see previously indistinguishable elements. One of the most significant discoveries was the image of a small notebook that Whitmore was holding in his hand. Upon magnification, it became clear that the cover of the notebook was not imprinted with English text, but with the German words Patientenaufzeichnungen, patient records. This was further confirmation of the director's true identity. Even more disturbing was the barely visible medical instruments laid out on a table in the corner of the room, partially hidden by the figures of the administrators. Experts in historical medicine consulted by Sokolova identified these instruments as specialized equipment used in controversial psychiatric procedures of the time, many of which were already considered questionable then and are now recognized as barbaric and inhumane. Analysis of the facial expressions of the women in the photograph also provided important information. Experts in forensic psychology noted signs of severe psychological distress, fear, and, in some cases, signs of drug use. These observations were consistent with evidence from Elizabeth Connor's diary that some inmates were given special medications before the rituals. The discovery shocked the scientific community. As Sokolova's investigation became more widely known in academic circles, she began receiving information from other historians and researchers interested in the case. A colleague from Harvard University sent her a copy of a little-known medical journal published in the early 20th century, in which Whitmore had published an article on his methods at Riverside. Upon careful analysis of this article, Sokolova discovered striking similarities to earlier works by Brenner published in German medical journals. Not only were the theoretical foundations and methodological approaches virtually identical, but some phrases and formulations were literally translated from German into English. This was compelling evidence that Whitmore of the post-war era and Brenner were one and the same person. However, the most disturbing aspect of the article was the description of the results of the treatment. Whitmore claimed that his methods led to significant moral improvement in 80% of inmates, with particularly high success rates among those who underwent intensive therapy. Given what was now known about the nature of these methods, these claims took on a sinister undertone. Sokolova decided to trace Whitmore's subsequent career after his time at Riverside. Records showed that he remained director of the institution until 1906, when he suddenly resigned for health reasons. After that, he worked as a consultant at several other correctional facilities across the country before reportedly dying of a heart attack in 1912. However, further research revealed a troubling aspect of his legacy. Many of the methods developed at Riverside were adopted, often in slightly modified form, by other correctional facilities across America. The so-called Riverside model was recognized as a cutting-edge approach to rehabilitating female offenders and influenced policy in the field for decades. The shocking truth was that a German psychiatrist with a questionable reputation, hiding from a scandal in his home country, had significantly influenced the development of the American correctional system for women, introducing methods that can now be recognized as a form of systematic psychological abuse. But the story took an even more unexpected turn. In the course of her investigation, Sokolova discovered that after Whitmore's death in 1912, there were unconfirmed reports of a German doctor working in a small private clinic in upstate New York. This doctor, known as Friedrich Müller, specialized in treating female nervous disorders using methods suspiciously similar to those used at Riverside. Although there was no direct evidence that Müller was Brenner Whitmore, the coincidences were too significant to ignore. Age, physical description, specializations, and treatment methods. Everything indicated that it could be the same person who had changed his identity for the third time. Even more alarming was the discovery that this clinic received indirect funding from the federal government through a grant to study methods for treating mental illness. If Müller was indeed Brenner, this meant that the American government was unintentionally sponsoring the continuation of his questionable experiments. The evidence was impossible to ignore. To confirm her theory, Sokolova turned to experts in forensic anthropology, asking them to compare all available photographs of Brenner, Whitmore, and Müller. Using state-of-the-art facial feature analysis software, experts confirmed with 95% probability that all three images belonged to the same person, photographed at different stages of his life. This changed everything we knew about the history of the American penitentiary system. As the investigation deepened, Sokolova discovered that the influence of Brenner and Whitmore, Müller on American psychiatry and the penitentiary system was more significant than anyone could have imagined. His approaches to moral correction of women, albeit in a mitigated form, were included in the official guidelines for correctional facilities across the country. His theories about female criminality as a form of psychological disorder requiring aggressive intervention influenced an entire generation of American criminologists and psychiatrists. Sokolova also discovered that several of Brenner Whitmore's students had taken influential positions in the American correctional system and psychiatric hospitals. These individuals continued to apply and develop their mentors' methods, often unaware of their true origins and questionable ethical basis. One of the most disturbing aspects of this discovery was the fact that some of these methods continued to be used in modified form in American correctional facilities for women until the mid-20th century. It was only after the reforms of the 1960s and 70s that these practices were finally recognized as unethical and discontinued. But even more shocking was a document Sokolova discovered in the FBI archives dated 1942, indicating that American intelligence services were aware of the true identity of Dr. Whitmore as early as the early 20th century. According to this document, federal authorities decided not to take any action against Brenner, as his research was considered potentially valuable to national security. This document pointed to an even more disturbing possibility, that the psychological conditioning methods developed by Brenner at Riverside may have later been adapted for use in early American intelligence programs for mind control. Sokolova understood that her findings had far-reaching implications not only for the historical understanding of the penitentiary system, but also for the modern understanding of the evolution of psychiatric methods and the ethics of medical research. The discovery revealed the shocking truth that dozens, perhaps hundreds, of women at Riverside became unwitting subjects of unethical psychological experiments conducted by a man hiding from European justice. These women, many of whom were imprisoned for minor crimes, were subjected to abuse, disguised as progressive rehabilitation, with no way to resist or seek justice. Even more disturbing was the fact that the American government unknowingly funded and supported these experiments, considering them part of a cutting-edge correctional reform. Only decades later, the true nature of these treatments was recognized for what it really was: systematic psychological abuse that violated fundamental human rights. As Sokolova's research became known, it sparked significant reaction in both academic and public circles. Historians of the penitentiary system and psychiatry began to revise established narratives about the development of these fields in America. Organizations defending prisoners' rights used this story as an example of why constant vigilance is needed regarding the methods used in correctional facilities. Descendants of women held at Riverside united to seek official recognition and apologies for what their ancestors had endured. Many of them shared family stories of how being at Riverside had a long-term impact on their grandmothers and great-grandmothers, leading to chronic psychological problems that were often misdiagnosed and not properly treated. In response to these demands, New York State authorities established a commission to investigate the history of Riverside and assess the long-term impact of Brenner Whitmore's methods on the American penitentiary system. The commission also considered creating a memorial at the site of the former colony in memory of the women who suffered there. The academic community also reacted, organizing conferences and symposia dedicated to ethical issues in the history of psychiatry and correctional institutions. The Riverside case became an important example in discussions about how unethical methods can be normalized and institutionalized under the guise of progress and reform. For Sokolova, this investigation became a defining moment in her career. She continued to study the long-term impact of Brenner's methods on American psychiatry and the penitentiary system, discovering disturbing parallels with later controversial practices, including some methods used in re-education programs in the mid-20th century. However, perhaps the most important outcome of this discovery was a new understanding of the lives of the women who went through Riverside. The stories of their suffering, resistance, and survival, long buried in archives and family traditions, were finally heard and acknowledged. Their experiences became a powerful reminder of the importance of protecting the rights of the most vulnerable members of society, especially those who are incarcerated and have no voice to defend themselves. One black and white photograph, accidentally discovered during the demolition of an abandoned building, led to a reevaluation of an entire chapter of American history, demonstrating how archival research and modern technologies can combine to reveal truths that have remained hidden for too long. Ultimately, the story of Riverside became not just a tale about a German psychiatrist who deceived the American system, but also about the broader issue of how society defines deviance and attempts to correct it. It was a reminder that methods that were once considered progressive and scientific can later be recognized as cruel and inhumane, and of the need to constantly reevaluate our approaches to rehabilitation and punishment. In a world where questions about the rights of prisoners and the ethics of their treatment remain relevant, the story of Riverside offers important historical context and a warning. It reminds us that behind abstract theories of rehabilitation and punishment lie real human lives, and that our responsibility to history includes not only uncovering past abuses, but also ensuring that they do not happen again in the future. When Sokolova completed her research, she returned to that first photograph with which it all began. Looking at the faces of the women kneeling before the man who, as is now known, was Heinrich Brenner, she could not help but wonder. How many more such stories remain undiscovered in the archives of our past, waiting to be found and told? The photograph from Riverside, once hidden in private archives, has now become a powerful symbol of the need to confront even the most disturbing aspects of our history. It is a reminder that the process of historical research is never truly complete, and that each new generation must reevaluate the past in the light of evolving values and understanding. In a world where discussions about criminal justice reform and prisoners' rights continue to be central to public discourse, the lessons of Riverside remain relevant. They remind us of the potential danger of uncritically accepting methods of treating prisoners that may be presented as scientific or progressive, but may actually violate fundamental human rights. The Brenner-Whitmore story also raises important questions about how society treats female criminality and women in the criminal justice system. Many of the Riverside inmates were convicted of crimes deeply connected to their socioeconomic status and the gender expectations of the time, such as prostitution, vagrancy, or moral turpitude. Their vulnerability to Brenner's methods was heightened by both their status as prisoners and societal perceptions of female deviance as something that requires special correction. In this context, Sokolova's discovery can be seen not only as an exposure of historical injustice, but also as a call for a deeper understanding of how gender biases can influence criminal justice systems and rehabilitation methods. It is a reminder that such systems do not exist in a vacuum, but are shaped by broader social beliefs and prejudices. When the public learned about the results of Sokolova's research, it sparked a wave of interest in the overall history of women's correctional facilities in America. Other historians began to revisit the archives of similar institutions, looking for signs of similar abuses or unethical practices. This led to a broader reinterpretation of the history of women's prisons and reformatories, revealing patterns of control and coercion that were often masked as rehabilitation and reform. As a result of these studies, a new understanding of the historical development of the penitentiary system for women in America emerged, an understanding that recognizes both the good intentions of many reformers and the harm that was sometimes done in the name of progress and science. This more nuanced view of the past helps inform modern debates about criminal justice reform, reminding us of the potential dangers of approaches that do not respect the dignity and autonomy of prisoners. Ultimately, the legacy of Riverside and Heinrich Brenner serves as a powerful reminder that true justice and rehabilitation cannot be achieved through coercion and control, but only through approaches that recognize and respect the humanity of even those who have violated social norms. This is a lesson that remains relevant today, as we continue to grapple with questions about how best to structure our systems of justice and punishment. And in this, perhaps, lies the most important contribution of Sokolova's investigation. It not only exposed a historical deception, but also shed light on deeper questions about power, vulnerability, and society's responsibility to those it incarcerates. It is a reminder that history is not just a record of past events, but also a constant interaction with the present, helping us to better understand our own moral and ethical obligations. In a world where many of these questions remain unresolved, the story of Riverside serves as an important reminder that we must always remain vigilant in protecting the rights of the most vulnerable among us, and that the true measure of a society can be found in how it treats those who are completely in its power.